Okay, so hi everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Sally McDonald and I'm Head of Client Services at Alterian. As part of the relaunch of the company, we are now running a monthly webinar series where we're focused in on the day-to-day users of our campaign manager and email manager tools. And this month, we're focusing in on the hints and tips part of the series. And today, I'm joined by Alison Georges, one of our consultants who's been working with Alterian customers and partners for 7 years, who's based out of our San Francisco office. Today, Alison is going to focus in on helping us understand how we can use the right timing tools in Campaign Manager to ensure your campaigns are really crafted in the right way to achieve your desired outcomes. But just before I hand over to Alison, a few housekeeping points. So regarding questions and answers, the presentation's about 20 minutes long and we have 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So if you have any questions that you can think of during the presentation, and if you're logged in via your laptop, you'll find the Q&A section, I think towards the top left-hand side of your screen. But if you can't find that, then I will be monitoring the customer success at alterian.com inbox. So please email that. And if we don't get round to answering everyone's questions today, then I will make sure I follow up with you guys after this webinar. And indeed, if you have any questions at all about anything to do with this webinar series, any feedback, ideas, content, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And second of all, we will be recording today's session for you guys to refer back to, and I will be in touch next week sometime about how we get that distributed out to you guys. So with all of that said, I'm going to unmute Alison now and I'll hand over, and Alison will be running the session today. So let me unmute you now, Alison.
All right, thank you, Sally. Thank you for the introduction. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about some campaign timing. So as Sally said, what we're going to talk about is how to time parts of your campaign and the phases within the campaign to achieve certain follow-up outcomes. And follow-ups can be categorized into a couple different buckets. We have time-based, we have reactive. But real quick, let's talk about our agenda for the next 20 minutes. So before we dive into different scenarios for achieving various types of follow-ups, we're going to do a little recap on the time tools we do have available in our campaigns. A lot of you may already be familiar with these, maybe you're not, that's totally fine. We're going to do a small recap on this. Of course, there is documentation also that goes into more detail if you want to read up on this after the call. After that, we'll talk about various scenarios in which we want to follow up with our recipients, whether it's time-based on a schedule or reactive to how they behave with our emails or direct mail or whatever kind of communications you're sending. We'll talk about what kind of campaign tools are more appropriate for this type of follow-up versus that one, and the types of events you're checking for. And we'll also discuss just a tiny bit triggers versus some of this scheduled stuff we're talking about initially. So what if I don't want to wait a week to check to see if someone did something? Maybe I want to react to them near real time as soon as they opened an email or called up a call center. All right, so let's start off with a recap on our time tools. And some of these will probably look familiar to you if you are in the system regularly or if you just poke around here and there. So let's do a quick recap on these. I'm going to start with the two up at the top. So first we have On a Schedule, and probably 90% of campaigns use this tool pretty frequently. That's because On a Schedule is extremely explicit. We know exactly when it's going to run, at what date, at what time, and how regularly. Okay, so for instance, if you're sending a newsletter every Monday exactly at 9 a.m., then this is your go-to tool. And most people use this tool because their data updates only once a day or once a week, so that's how often we want this to run. Now, the next one is more of a small subset of the On a Schedule tool. So this one runs exactly on a specific date at a specific time, and that's about all it does. So this is nice for a fixed schedule of emails going out, which we'll talk about in just a bit. But all in all, these two tools can be kind of grouped together when we talk about the timing tools as being explicit scheduled tools. We know exactly when they're going to run. Now, the other two may also look familiar. The first one is called Due Immediately, and this is what populates your campaign tracks by default. Now, Due Immediately is a nice tool for when you want to check to see if somebody has maybe had an event happen for them in near real time. And this is because the Due Immediately is going to check for new recipients who meet event criteria every few minutes. It's actually every 10 minutes by default, and you can change that. So it fires very often to check for new incoming data. The last one, after a period, is sort of on the same polling system. It's going to check for new updates to your recipients every few minutes, but here's the difference. After a period is more of a delay tool, so maybe a day after I enter this track, I get a follow-up, or a week after I enter. And this is nice because it's actually setting a timer for individuals as they come into the track. So if I come into this track on a Monday, I get my follow-up Tuesday. But if you come into this track on a Wednesday, you'll get your follow-up on Thursday. So these are more near real-time tools that are, again, constantly looking for changes in events or in data. And these are the 4 tools we're going to focus on for the next few scenarios. So we're going to start with a really simple example. What if I want to send you an email today and I want to send you a follow-up next Thursday? I don't care what you do with the emails. I don't care about contacting new people. I really just want to work with a fixed group of people and send them 2 things in a row. So what we have here is an example of how you might send an email 1 and a follow-up on a fixed time. Again, we're not worried about how the person reacts to the email. We're not worried about bringing new people in. So one way you can do this is, first, you'll notice we have a few different tracks. We have the start track where we're implementing our first email using a tool called On a Date. Again, this doesn't run more than once. It's going to run on the 17th at 6 p.m. my time. It will send email 1 and then send people off to a follow-up track. And everyone's going to sit there until Christmas Eve at 6 p.m. when the second email goes out. And then, like in most campaigns, we send them to a final done or end track where we just push them there for monitoring purposes. We can tell that they're done, they're completed in this campaign. So again, the fact that we're not bringing in anybody new, we're not doing this regularly, we're just doing this one-off series of emails means we're using On a Date because we only need these tracks to run once. Now, an alternative way to do that is actually with the grid campaign. So I'm going to go to my next slide here. It's going to be the exact same example except with a grid campaign instead of a track. Now, I'm not sure how many people on the call have seen or worked with the grid, but the grid is a type of campaign that really just runs once with a fixed audience. So what would happen in the grid campaign is we would use our grid tab to just select our entire audience of people and send them our first email. Now, even though we're in a grid tab, we still have a tracks tab. The start track is responsible for running that grid. So once the grid runs, we're going to again send them off to a follow-up track where on a future date, again, that's On a Date, it's only going to run once, send the follow-up to everybody, and then they're done. So these 2 ways are pretty much exactly the same. It's a matter of preference. You know, do you use tracks more than use grids? It's also partly a matter of familiarity. So whichever you prefer, they'll both get the job done. Again, if you want to do a scheduled series of emails to the same people, and then you're done. So that was mostly our On a Date tool. So let's kind of step it up a little bit and talk about the next scenario where, you know, I want to send a series of emails, but I want to continually pull in new people and send to them and have them start a journey. So great example is a welcome campaign. When you enter the data, we can pull you into a campaign and send you a welcome email and then send you a follow-up a week after that. And so obviously what that means is we have people coming into the data at different times. We don't have everyone coming in as a new customer on the exact same date. So here's what we would do in this case. So before we were doing emails just one at a time, once on our timeline, and that was On a Date. But this time we're going to use a couple different tools. So we're going to use an on a schedule in our start track. And what this means is every day, the start track is going to see who qualifies for my campaign audience and pull them in. So basically, it's going to pull any new people into the campaign. So any people who are now eligible to get a welcome email. So that's what they're getting here in the start track. And then they go on to the follow-up. Now, new tool here. This is after a period, because exactly 1 week after you get your first welcome email, I want to send you a follow-up. Okay. Now, why don't we use it on a schedule here? Well, because we can't send somebody something 1 day after, or we can't send exactly on a Tuesday or exactly on a Wednesday. So we're actually using this tool to say 1 week after the individual enters the track. So again, if I enter this track on a Monday, then next Monday I get email 2. But tomorrow, if people enter this track on a Friday, then they're going to get their follow-up next Friday. So again, it's constantly looking to see, hey, is it 1 week for you yet? Is it 1 week for you? It's checking your timer. So this on a schedule is more, again, an explicit scheduling tool. We know exactly when it's going to run. After a period, again, is more, this is constantly looking to see if your time is up yet. All right, moving on. I've got a few more here. So what we talked about so far was, well, I just want to send you one thing and then a follow-up regardless of what you do with the email. But what if you actually want to send a follow-up based on the recipient's behavior? So in this example, we'll pretend that we're sending an email that says, hey, we have a game on sales. So this is very similar to the last example where every day we pull in anybody who's new who qualifies for the campaign, and we send them this email about this sale going on with games. We're still using an after a period in the follow-up because we want to contact you again 1 week after you enter the track. But the only difference here is instead of directly implementing our second email, our follow-up, we're using an if branch. And the if branch is just kind of like a segment where you build a segment, and if you meet the segment criteria, you fall into the true branch, and if you don't, you fall into the false. So what I'm saying here is if, according to my base data that I have after my load, in the last 7 days you've purchased a game, then I'm going to say that was a successful campaign. I don't want to nag you anymore. However, if you still haven't purchased a game in the last 7 days, even though I sent you this email about our sale, I'm going to send it to you again. After that, maybe I'm done with everybody. So regardless of whether you did or didn't buy, I'm going to send you off to the final track, done. But again, the difference here is we've used an if branch to check and see if you have done something according to the base data that we have from our data load. So this is more reactive, again, after a certain amount of time. One other cool tool that lets you do something similar is called check event. So same setup, except this time we're checking to see if you opened an email. So the if branch was more like a, do you qualify for this segment? But the check event is cool because it actually lets you look directly at the events tied to, and this is for email manager users, any email manager creatives, okay? So if you have 3 emails in this campaign and you click into this box, you get to see all of the events associated with those creatives. Email opens, unsubscribes, clicking a particular image or link. As long as something's logged as an event on your creative, you can use this check event tool to pick that event directly from that creative. This is really doing the same thing. After a week, it's checking to see if you've opened a particular EM email. If you did open, then we want to send you a follow-up. If you didn't, we don't want to do anything. And of course, that varies by preference and requirements. One other cool thing about check event is we can actually check up on the events you do based on the events tab. So for instance, in our events tab, we can use a tool called import events to look at API events. So for instance, if you called up a call center or submitted a claim or a complaint online, we can create that as an API event and use this check event tool to see if it happened. Okay, so again, cool thing about check event is we can look directly at the events on our email manager creatives, but if you're not an EM user, we can also use this to look at any other events that we're bringing in external to the campaign, again, like API events. Now, all of this has been time-based. So after 5 days, after a week, after a day, I want to check to see if you did something. Let's talk briefly about triggers. So triggers allow me to check if you did something in near real time. So they're not waiting a week, they're not waiting a month. They're constantly listening for these events that we want to see that you fulfilled. So in this example, what we're doing is we're waiting to see if you do open an email, but we're not going to wait a week to check. So we're not going to use the if branch. We're not going to use the check event tool. What we're going to do instead is, just like in all of our other examples, we set up a schedule. Every day we bring in somebody new who qualifies, send them email 1, and then push them to a wait track. Now you'll notice there's no scheduling in this track. It is left at a due immediately, which again is subject to polling. So people are just going to sit there, but this polling combined with what we call triggers is constantly going to check to see if you have met this trigger criteria. And in this case, it happens to be an email open. And again, this could be from an email manager creative, but it could also be an API event. Now, whereas the other tracks were waiting for a certain amount of time, waiting a week, waiting a month, people are just sitting here until we receive an email open event for them. And as soon as we receive that, the trigger will pick them up out of this track and move them to the follow-up, where then we can give them a follow-up email. So everything up to the trigger was, I'm going to wait to see if you've done something, or I'm just going to send you follow-ups on a fixed schedule. But again, if I want to see if you fulfilled a particular event as it happens, so again, if you have real-time data coming back in from email manager creatives, or if you're reading from API events, the trigger again will pick up people within minutes of receiving that event and then push them to the next phase for a follow-up. And you'll notice our follow-up is also on a due immediately, because as soon as this track receives somebody, we want to send them the follow-up right away. So again, we have a variety of scheduling tools. Maybe I want to do something regularly on a date, or maybe I want to do something as soon as I pick somebody up, as soon as they qualify for an event, or even after a day or two. Again, there is time-based stuff where we wait a certain amount of time and then we send you a follow-up regardless of how you responded. There's reactive campaigns where we use an if branch or a check event to see if you've done something particular, if your data has changed, if we've received an event on you. But again, to close it off, triggers are really nice for when you are checking to see that somebody did X, Y, Z. Again, within minutes of the action. It's near real time. All right, so that brings us to the end of our scenarios. Now we're going to open it up to questions. And like Sally said, there is a Q&A box. So at this point, we're going to check for questions.
Thanks, Alison. That was really good. And yeah, great presentation there. Quite a lot to cover in 20 minutes, so well done. So yeah, actually, we had a few people join the webinar after you started. So if anyone has any questions, if you want to take a look at the top left-hand side of your screen, there should be a Q&A box there that you can type your questions into. But actually, we did have one question whilst you were talking, Alison, and that was actually sent to the customer success inbox. It was, do you need a done track to poll every few minutes? I wondered if you could answer that question for me.
Sure. And what I'm going to do then is I am going to go to my training environment, and I'm going to make sure you guys can see that. So I'm going to change my sharing option real quick. And Sally, could you just confirm for me that you can see?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so I believe the question was, do you need a done track to be constantly polling? And the answer to that is no. So here's an example. I'm going to go to this campaign where we regularly pull people in, we send them an email, and then we send them a follow-up a week later. And then after that, they're done. So for a track considered to be done or end or finish, whatever you want to call it, we really just use this to hold people who are finished in the campaign. When we go back to our overview totals, we'll be able to see who's in which track. And seeing 100 people in the done track means, oh, well, I know that they're done. I know that they successfully made it through. Now, the done or finish or end track really isn't doing anything at all. So we don't need it to do anything, including polling. So an option is you can click into your done track here, and in the top left of your screen, there's an attributes tab where you can turn that polling off. So for instance, with a trigger, I would want this polling to be on, maybe looking every 10 minutes for somebody who's opened an email. But on a done track or finish or end, I'm just going to turn that off because I literally don't need that track to do anything at all. And that actually saves quite a number of jobs sent off to the server, right? We don't have this track constantly saying if it has to do anything with its recipients every 10 minutes. That would really be a waste of energy. So no, you do not need a done track to be polling at all during a campaign. You only need something to be polling if you intend to maybe email or implement a tactic or push somebody to another track. But because there are no tools here, we don't have to have this track do anything at all. Therefore, no polling.
Oh, great. Cool. Thanks, Alison. And actually, I don't know if this is slightly related, but we've had another one come through. Let me just read this right. So it's, how do you control the polling on a do immediately or after a period tool?
Cool. So that is totally related. So as we talked earlier, the do immediately and after a period, those are both on polling systems, and you can change the polling very similarly to what I just showed. So if you click into an after a period or a do immediately, kind of where you insert your tools, you will be able to click on that attributes tab in the top left. And so what we just discussed was you can turn that polling off, for example, in a done track. But if you wanted to change how frequently the track was polling, maybe you have performance concerns because maybe you have 100 campaigns running with a bunch of triggers, okay? For instance, if over here in our follow-up track, every week we push somebody over to the next track and we email them, maybe we don't want to check every 10 minutes that it's been a week, right? That's a little excessive. So in order to change how frequently this is checking, we can change the number of seconds that it checks. So you can increase this. Maybe I want this to check way less frequently. So I'm clicking and typing into this poll box here to change how frequently this is checking. Has it been a week for this recipient yet?
Okay, great. That's brilliant. Thanks, Alison.